here's the thing I was going to say before, uh, your phone died or whatever, is when you're going up to someone for advice, right? And you explain the situation, you have to be ready for blunt feedback, basically.
Yeah.
You got to be ready um, to understand that you may be wrong in the situation, especially if it's dealing with other people. You explain the situation, and it's like, sorry, you're actually in the wrong. That just doesn't sound right.
Yeah.
Um, you just got to be ready and willing to be wrong, and to get blunt feedback, and to not
Yeah.
attack the other person because of the mindset they have, and because you're the one going to them for advice, and this is the advice that they're giving you. So be thankful for that advice, and then take everything with a grain of salt,
Yeah.
because you that's the one thing about us that I like is, we give each other feedback, and if we take the feedback, we do. No hard feelings if we don't.
Yeah. Well, I think one of the biggest things about it could be us or
Yeah.
just good conversations in general is that they're mostly impartial, right?
Yeah.
So it's not like obviously you have your biases like
Hmm.
just ingrained in your mind, but when you're engaging in a good conversation, right? You would like to be as impartial as possible, because a good conversation is not just someone that completely complies with everything you're saying, right?
Yeah.
It's I think, in my opinion, a good conversation is uh, a good understanding of the opposition, right? Of the opposite side of whatever your conversation or your debate or whatever is, because you're getting an understanding,
Yeah.
So, I heard something. I don't know if this is just me, or I'm pretty sure I heard something, but a great debater knows like his opponent in a
Yeah.
sense, So yeah,
It's basically playing devil's advocate, like in a situation. I mean, that's what I do to myself is when I'm going into something, I'm like, okay, let's look at it through this eye though. Let's play devil's advocate a little bit. How's this person saying, or ask the
yeah,
questions that I wouldn't think to ask.
yeah.
That's how you
I
have to
mean,
look at things.
well, that devil's advocate thing, I just hate that word, because and this could just be my parents,
I
or
gotcha.
my mom. You know what I mean? Like she loves to play that role, and it irks me sometimes.
Gotcha.
But I understand where you're coming from.
Hmm.
I would just say like it in a term of like seeing it from multiple perspectives, right? Or even seeing it from this perspective, that your perspective could be wrong,
Yeah.
right? And that humbling understanding that you're not perfect.
Hmm.
Your observation or whatever you're trying to put out is not
Hmm.
perfect, I think is the step one to having a good
Yeah.
conversation.
Yeah. And
So
this, I think this is a perfect thing to bring up is, again, we're young. We don't know everything that we're talking about to perfection. So we can be wrong in these conversations in this podcast.
of course, yeah.
I always like reminding people any chance we get, because people could have really strong opinions about something. It's like, hey, we could be wrong. We're just
Yeah.
talking.
That's
So,
very true. That's very true. And like I said before, like I
hmm.
guess both saying the same thing,
Hmm.
but the understanding or the humbleness it takes to understand that you could be wrong, right?
Yep.
Is step one to even having a good conversation, or even having a conversation in general. Um,
Exactly.
and so, for example, on the topic of listening, right?
Hmm.
So I run a Facebook group for the viewers who don't know. I run a Facebook group called COVID-19 101, right? And basically, it's just a group to try to minimize hysteria in these times. So we're now in April, early April, to 2020, and it's like the peak in America of this coronavirus.
Yep.
So trying to ease that hysteria that's going on in the media, where they're just portraying fear mongering people into doing whatever, you know what I mean? And not even educating people at that same sense. That's what my group
Is
aims
meant
to do.
for.
Yeah, it aims to do is just to educate more, so I'm not saying that I have the answers in that group, but you could probably read something that could really relate to you in your situation, right? Besides the point.
It's a great source of
Basically,
information. So
I love it. I love reading what other people have to say. Other people send me articles, and because they don't want to be like really kind of publicized on there. Doesn't matter. I love reading in general. But one of the things is being the admin, I have a lot of control over said group. I have a lot of control over the group, and it's kind of cool. I'm not gonna lie. It's like CEO training, right? So but for the most part, I see how a lot of people, or some people, I should say, lack the basic communication skills to even debate. To even have that ability to challenge a question or challenge an article. And so I'm not saying everyone in there, but there's some obvious people in there who are coming from one side, a one-sided argument, and holding this as if this is the truth. This is the this is the crucible. This is it.
yeah.
So and sometimes that bothers me because like I said, step one to having a conversation is understanding that you could be wrong.
Yep.
So.
And something I learned about arguments is, and this is how I approach arguments, is whatever the argument is about, that person nor I am going to convince the other that they're right.
Yeah.
Or because that's just how arguments are.
I got a good one. Or go ahead.
Well, yeah. The simple way of putting it, if I told you, hey, 1 + 1 = 3, and you tell me I'm wrong, nothing you say is going to make me believe that I'm wrong, because there's an ego behind it. There's lots of things behind it. It's like, I'm just not willing to give up that that mindset that I'm wrong. And me personally, I'm okay with admitting I'm wrong, but there's people who aren't. So if you want to end an argument quickly and this person isn't going to give up, you kind of just be like, okay, yeah, you're right. Even though that they're wrong, just be like, okay, you're right, and move on. That's kind of how I handle arguments. If it's not going anywhere.
Two things. My study of theology brought me to, reading the Quran, right?
Yep.
And so in one of the first, let's say, chapters, right? I think it's the first chapter. It talks about how arguing gets you nowhere. And it says, like, this is probably one of the worst things that you could do, because the only way to end an argument is to convert to the other person ideas, in a sense, right? So, just from that parable or metaphor or whatever the Quran brings out, that is just showing you how deeply some people can believe about not arguing, right? And I believe that when you're in good conversations, you're not arguing as much as trying to delete the fallacies, right? In both ideas, right? So let's say you tell me 1 + 1 = 3, right? I'll be like, yo, man, my entire life I've been hearing 1 + 1 = 2, but explain, tell me what's going on. You get what I'm saying? Yeah. So that's a way I would say a good listener practices good listening to me, right?
And another thing too, another way to approach that would be like, okay, you think 1 + 1 = 3. It just be like, hey man, I could be wrong, but I've always thought 1 + 1 = 2. Let's go check the facts with it. Let's go find that out. Let's go find out the facts and see who's right.
I got a preschool teacher down the street. She's pretty certified in this.
And that's what you got to find the facts, or try to figure things out. And it's okay to admit, like, hey, I may be wrong, but I've always thought this, but is there a way for us to meet in the middle and figure this out, instead of us having a yelling competition back and forth?
Right. And I think everyone watching, and you and I, everyone in this chat, you know what I mean, you and I, know people who know things, right? So know the facts in a sense. You still there?
Yeah.
Well, okay. Well, I think you and I both know people who know the facts, you know,
Yeah.
or are smart individuals, and
Mhm.
you know, whether they comes to them naturally or they do a lot of studying.
Mhm.
Um, However they got their understanding, they got the understanding with a certain bit of arrogance, to the point where, like, when they're sharing with someone who is unknowledgeable, right, someone who
Mhm.
doesn't know, there's like this arrogant tone, or there's this was it this stale air in
Mhm.
between, you know, the explainer and the student, in a sense, you know.
I got you. Yeah.
And I think, you know, if you want to come into understanding, or let's say self-actualization, or whatever whoever wants to call it, you know, everyone's got their own word for it. But, you know, if you want to come to understanding, right, I think a bit of that is um, practicing how to be a good teacher, in a sense, right?
Yep.
So how to communicate to a mass amount of people, right? Because
Yep.
that does take a lot of skill. It's not
Mhm.
just you being you is just gonna appeal to everybody, right? And, you know, you can't please everybody, but most people, right?
Yep.
Um, so I think that's a big one too. You know, I know a lot of people who are very smart but just can't communicate, you know, and it's a sad story almost, you
Oh
know,
yeah,
like,
of course. I mean, yeah.
yeah.